There's a moment in every comeback story where the cameras stop telling the truth. You see the sparks, the triumph, the roaring engine, the crowd going wild in the comments section, but you never see the person standing just outside the frame, holding the whole thing together while quietly falling apart. That's exactly what happened behind the scenes of the most talked about hypercar rebuild in YouTube history. Everyone remembers the Bugatti. Almost no one knows what it nearly cost the woman who never touched a wrench on that car. Yet without her, none of it would have existed at all. This is the story the highlight reels left out, and once you hear it, you'll never watch that engine start video the same way again. Long before Mat Armstrong became the mechanic the internet couldn't stop talking about, he was just a young man who had lost the only identity he'd ever known. A shoulder injury had ended his career as a professional BMX rider almost overnight, and with it went the structure, the purpose, and the sense of self he'd spent years building. He wasn't looking for fame, he was looking for something to hold on to. That something turned out to be a wrecked Audi TT, written off in an insurance auction after a crash that belonged to his then-girlfriend Hannah. He bought the ruined car for a few £100s, not because he had a plan, but because fixing things was the one language he still knew how to speak fluently. There was no audience, no expectation, just a man, a garage, and a car that used to belong to the woman who would later become his wife. What followed wasn't a viral explosion. It was slow, unglamorous, and honest. Videos of a broken car being brought back piece by piece, uploaded for whoever happened to stumble across them. But people did stumble across them, and they kept coming back, because underneath the mechanical work was something more human, a man rediscovering his sense of purpose one bolt at a time. And the detail almost nobody talks about is this. The very first car he ever rebuilt on camera was hers. Hannah wasn't a bystander to Matt's origin story, she was the starting point of it. As the channel grew, so did Hannah's role, even though the audience rarely saw it. While Matt filmed and wrenched and narrated every triumph and setback in front of the camera, Hannah was building the entire structure behind it. She handled the scheduling, the merchandise, the logistics, the flood of messages that came with a growing platform. Every video that made it online, every order that shipped, every deal that got negotiated, her fingerprints were on all of it, invisibly. Matt was the face people fell in love with. Hannah was the framework that made it possible for that face to keep showing up week after week. So when a phone call came in describing a written-off Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport, one of the rarest and most expensive machines ever built, valued somewhere around $6 million, most professionals in the industry wanted nothing to do with it. Insurance companies had condemned it, independent experts had walked away. The car's tolerances were so extreme, so far beyond ordinary automotive engineering, that even seasoned specialists considered the repair essentially impossible outside of Bugatti's own factory walls. To everyone else, it was a dead project. To Matt, it looked like destiny, the natural next step after years of proving doubters wrong. He said yes almost instantly. Hannah heard that same yes very differently. She wasn't thinking about the $6 million price tag or the mechanical impossibility of the job. She was thinking about what it would demand from the man she loved, the time, the isolation, the scrutiny, the sheer weight of doing something this public with this much room to fail. She had already watched stress take a toll on him during smaller projects. Now the entire world was about to watch, judge, and weigh in on every decision he made. She had no way of knowing just how heavy that would become. She said yes to standing behind him anyway. What came next unfolded across two very different fronts. In Miami, the rebuild spiraled into an international story almost overnight. Bugatti itself intervened, locking the vehicle's identification number so that official parts could no longer be sourced through normal channels. A move that turned an already brutal technical challenge into something closer to an obstacle course with no map. Automotive journalists picked apart every decision. Strangers online, many of whom had never so much as changed their own oil, became overnight experts convinced they knew better. The criticism didn't stay online. It followed Matt home, into his voice on late-night calls, into the silences that stretched a beat too long, into a version of him that seemed to be disappearing a little more each week under the weight of everyone else's opinions. Back in the UK, Hannah lived through all of it secondhand, through a phone screen and a voice that sounded more distant with each passing month. He was calling, he was there, but increasingly, he wasn't fully there, buried under something she couldn't reach no matter how much she wanted to. That particular kind of loneliness, being in constant contact with someone you love while sensing the most essential part of them has gone somewhere you can't follow, is difficult to describe to anyone who hasn't lived it. And she couldn't say any of this publicly. The channel was thriving. Millions of people were emotionally invested in a story that, on the surface, looked like nothing but triumph. So she carried it quietly, answering emails, managing schedules, holding the business together, while holding something much heavier that she had nowhere to set down. What almost nobody knows is that while the internet obsessed over a garage in Miami, Hannah was quietly running her own rebuild hundreds of miles away. She bought a battered old Land Rover Defender and started restoring it with her father, originally just to fill the silence and keep her hands busy during a stretch of life that felt increasingly out of her control. But somewhere along the way, that project stopped being a distraction. Every part she repaired, every problem she solved with her own hands, became a way of reclaiming something the pressure of the previous months had slowly worn away. Not her identity as someone's wife or as the person keeping a business afloat, but simply her own sense of capability, on her own terms. There's a particular kind of relief in a problem that responds directly to your effort, especially when the biggest problem in your life, the distance growing between you and the person you love, refuses to be solved no matter what you try. In that garage, with her father beside her, Hannah found a version of herself the Bugatti project had been quietly taking away. Then, after months of setbacks, part shortages, manufacturer resistance, and relentless public skepticism, the engine finally turned over. 16 cylinders, 1,500 horsepower, a sound that rolled through the workshop and out across the internet like a verdict. For millions of viewers, it was pure spectacle, the ultimate underdog moment. Proof that an ordinary mechanic from Leicester had out-engineered an entire industry's doubts. But Hannah's reaction wasn't about the car at all. When that engine roared back to life, she cried, and later she made clear those tears had nothing to do with $6 million or vindication. She cried because in that sound, she finally heard Mat coming back to her. Not the celebrated mechanic the world was cheering for, but the man underneath, the one she had been quietly, privately afraid of losing for months. That's the real meaning behind the 4 words she later used to describe those months. I almost lost him. She wasn't talking about the marriage ending. She was talking about watching someone she loved slowly hollowed out by pressure, so relentless and so cumulative that it started eroding the very things that made him himself. His groundedness, his presence, his ability to simply be there with the people who mattered. Nobody else saw that erosion happening in real time. The cameras captured the mechanical drama and the eventual triumph, but only Hannah carried the knowledge of what it was actually costing, night after night, for months on end. When she finally spoke about it publicly, it wasn't to complain or to cast herself as a victim. It was because the full story deserved to be told honestly, not just the version with a happy ending and a viral engine start, but the version where a woman quietly held an entire operation together while fighting to hold on to herself, and a man pushed himself to the very edge of what he could carry, and somehow found his way back. 2 rebuilds were happening simultaneously in 2 different garages, and neither one was really about the machine sitting in front of them. Mat was rebuilding a car everyone said couldn't be saved. Hannah was rebuilding a version of herself the pressure had almost taken. And in the end, remarkably, both of them came out the other side still standing, still together, still willing to say it had all been worth it.